And since the year 2009, we have also been providing services in the York region with specific reference to the city of Markham. So the experiences, the observations and conclusions that I have there are based on our work in Scarborough as well as Markham. We also have the how should we say, the unique challenge as well as the good fortune of being able to work with significant numbers of immigrant communities, because both Scarborough and Markham, the primary areas we work in, have a significant newcomer visible minority population. So the whole business of, before we get into hidden homelessness and what it's all about, I would like to draw your attention to the context that frames the background for housing and hidden homelessness, which is the interaction of the two main experiences for the average newcomer to Canada, namely employment on one side and settlement on the other. Settlement, as I'm sure all of you know, refers to the experience of finding housing, of finding adequate schools for one's children, of getting mundane things, something like getting a SIM card, getting the OHIP, that kind of stuff. Employment, again, to state the obvious, consists of becoming job ready, finding the ideal CV, then addressing the whole issue of Canadian experience, and hopefully ending up with a job in one's field. So what happens is, the interesting thing here is that newcomers are selected for admission to Canada based on the skills. So they come to Canada expecting to find employment in their own field, which is a very reasonable assumption, but it doesn't always work out that way, and you'll see that in the next few slides. So now here comes the interesting part. It seems that even in the 1960s, when the present settlement system was first put in place, you had significant numbers of immigrants who were not able to find employment in the field. So in the late 60s, when the settlement processes were put in, these are all processes that are which are usually kind of contracted out to non-profits for helping newcomers settle. It seems that the whole system was designed in such a way that employment and settlement are seen as two completely independent issues, and one can complete either process without reference to the other. Which is to say, settlement and employment are seen as independent variables, right? So you can complete settlement without employment, you can complete employment without settlement. And so therein lies the genius of the methodology that was put into place. Unfortunately, what happens is, the average newcomer who comes to Canada comes in with a very different set of assumptions. And we see this in our work all the time, because when we ask the newcomer, what help can we give you? And mind you, we are a help. The name says Housing Help Agency. There is nothing about employment in the name of the agency. When we ask them, how can we help you? The answer almost always is, help me with a job, and I can settle without any problem. So every time you try to kind of make the conversation go towards housing, they steer the conversation back towards employment, right? So that is how crucial employment is in their scheme of things. And therefore, starts the frustration. You've got this wonderful system that is supposed to work, that can help you complete the settlement process without reference to employment. But it does not capture the instinctive thinking of the newcomer, where the whole business of settlement is a function of employment. And therefore, the change in the assumption, the fact that the two assumptions kind of collide with each other, one which says that the two are independent processes, and the other that makes one a dependent variable of the other, is the reason why we have all the chaos in the housing and hidden homelessness, in the housing market, resulting in hidden homelessness. So this is one of the themes that will come up in various shapes and forms throughout the discussion. And so it's a tragedy that we have all these systems that we need to in place. This is not for a lack of solution, but it's simply that one side doesn't see what the other side sees. So it's a lack of communication than a lack of solution. So we come to the question, what is hidden homelessness? Since a picture is worth 1,000 words, I thought I'd hooked up a picture of hidden homelessness out here. This is, yes, I know at this stage usually I'm asked if this is a picture from Toronto, and I assure you it is. If you drive from Yonge and Shepherd, which is so to say the hip end of Shepherd Avenue, all the way to the zoo, which is at the other end of Shepherd Avenue, you will see various changes in streetscape, including stuff that looks like this. And again, it can be seen even in other parts of the city. It's just not Scarborough or Shepherd Avenue. You can see it probably in Mississauga, Markham, anywhere you want. So if you look at the apartment complex, you can kind of guess as to what kind of a quality of life must be the residents of this apartment complex must be having. While they have a roof over their head, for all other purposes, the quality of life is no different from that of a homeless person. So that is how you get the expression hidden homelessness, in that you have a roof over the head, but the quality of life is the same as that of a homeless person. So if you look at the amount of laundry that has been put out, and if you look at the amount of furniture that has been put out in the balcony, you can tell that each of these apartments has got enough people to populate a whole floor. Each floor has got enough people to populate an apartment complex, and the apartment complex probably has got enough people to populate a small town in rural Ontario. So that's the kind of population concentration you're looking at. There is another variant of the same process, which again it's seen all the time in the suburbs. If you, the first time you look at the house, you get the impression that there's this wealthy, affluent family that lives here, because I can certainly count 6 cars, and there probably are more that I can't count. Right? So it looks like this wonderful big house where a family with 6 cars lives, till you start noticing, all the trash that is on the outside. And you can see these stairs. I request you to note that on the right hand side of the picture, you can see stairs kind of going up. And which is a very unusual thing. How many times do you see a house where you see stairs on the outside of the house as opposed to the inside of the house? And so the reason why all this has been put into place is so that people can go to the top floor. These are people who rent on the top floor. And once you go inside the house, you will see nothing but walls. The inside of the house consists of walls, doors and windows, and that's it. So that the landlord has the ability to randomly place partitions, cordon off a small section and call it a room, and that is then rented out to a newcomer family. So you should not be surprised if you go into one of these houses and see, say, a dozen families living in that kind of space. So, what is this? I mean, what is the reason why this is caused, and what are the factors that help hidden homelessness persist? As we all know, when a newcomer family comes to Toronto, they stay with a friend or a family, and sooner or later they begin to look for their own place to live. So when they start looking for housing, not surprisingly, they have to pass a 3-part test, which is you have to show proof of employment, this proof of references, and you have to pass a credit check. Now, employment, that is clearly out, we all know that. Credit checks is, in many of the developing countries from where the vast majority of newcomers come, the concept of a credit check is still theoretical, it does not exist in practice. So, chances are that they will not have a credit history in Canada, and they probably do not have a credit history in the native country because such a concept doesn't exist. As far as references are concerned, they probably again are in their native country. So essentially what happens is you have the average immigrant failing all 3 parts of the test here. So what many landlords have been doing certainly over the last decade, if not longer, is that they give the newcomer a way out who's fairly desperate for housing right now, which is they ask him or her if they can pay 6 months of rent or more upfront as a deposit, and in exchange for that the test can be waived. Now we all know that in the province of Ontario, what the landlord can ask you for is the first and last month's rent. Anything beyond that is illegal. So on day one, there's this illegal deal that is being proposed to the newcomer, who probably doesn't know any better and is desperate, so that they take it. The only problem is, how does the newcomer come up with 6 months of rent as a deposit? So what you do is you pool your resources, so to say, with other newcomers who are also in the same boat. And so on day one, you've got 4 families move into a space that is meant to be lived in by one and only one family, just as a way of making it easy to come up with the 6 months of rent. And then of course there's the whole issue of unemployment and underemployment, so that just kind of makes the situation go longer and longer. So one of the interesting things that we see is that if you talk to the newcomer on day one, when they're kind of moving into this kind of a bad situation, they almost always assure you that the situation will improve as soon as they find employment. And they think that the finding employment is not going to take more than 3 or 6 months. So after 6 months, the problem should be solved. But as we all know, the 3 months then becomes 6 months, 6 months becomes a year becomes 5 years. And so there's this kind of permanent temporariness to the whole issue of finding employment. And as a consequence, the housing situation also is a major problem. So the reason why it persists is because, in addition to the lack of access to housing appropriate for newcomers, means and needs, which kind of seems very obvious, but I thought I'd point out that in Australia, way back in the 1980s, you had a very interesting scheme whereby newcomers who would migrate to Australia would be housed in housing appropriate for their needs, such as the family size, for about 2 or 3 months till they found themselves on their feet, and then put moat and go look for a better place. So there is that kind of an experiment that has been tried out and has been successful. I guess because of the cost, everything was abandoned way back in the 1980s, and today Australia pretty much works with newcomers the way Canada works with them. Right? Then there's the issue of the lack of awareness about legal rights as tenants. We have to take into account that many immigrants who come to Canada come from countries where you're taught from day one not to trust the justice system. Judges can be bribed, the system can be slow. In a country like China, if you try to take on the government, you're asking for trouble. In India, which is another major source of immigration, you see what happened. I mean, the system works, but it works so slow that probably your grandchildren will be the ones who will show up in court if you went to court today. So it's the kind of thing you're asked not to do. So suddenly when they come to Canada and they're asked to kind of go to the landlord and drive them board, it's probably not the most instinctive thing that they would want to do. It's like asking a left-handed person to become right-handed. And then of course the sad fact is you have got limited economic means, which means that even if the landlord, even if the tenant were to do something about the problem and then go to the landlord-tenant board, realistically what are the options? The landlord will then serve an eviction notice, which will be unfair and unjust, but it will be served nevertheless. And then where does the newcomer move to? He's out on the streets now, right? So that there is that kind of your world becomes more and more constrained because of one issue that came up at the very end that wasn't taken care of in time. So the first issue has already been addressed, which is this is the kind of thing that would, if you're a wordsmith, this is the kind of thing you'd like to play with. The whole issue of newcomers waiting 3 months and 6 months and permanently to find a job. Is this temporary permanence or permanent temporariness? And I'm not sure of which way to go. So what is the adjective? What is the noun? Is something that it's a wordsmith who will have fun with this kind of thing. Nobody else has fun with it. Second, and then there's the very interesting issue of defensiveness. If you ask many newcomers as to why they live in situations of hidden homelessness, a commonly heard answer is, but we live this way together in my native country, which is a very interesting argument, because it is true that in many parts of Asia and Africa, if not other parts of the world, it is the custom to live with one's extended family. However, when you talk about family, you're talking about a relative, about somebody who's related to you by blood, or to your spouse by blood. It's not a question of a random collection of people who share a language, a culture, and other beliefs, and therefore become family. So this is a very odd. What the point I'm trying to draw your attention to in this kind of a context. You may share friends, you may share languages, you may share religion, but that doesn't make it a family, right? So it's a very interesting way of trying to defend something that is inherently indefensible. And lastly, in many of the newcomer communities, there's this whole business of striving so hard to be the so-called model minority. A model minority, as many of us know, is a different way of saying Shangri-La, which is the community, everything in the community is perfect, so everybody has the perfect job. The children have perfect grades in schools and they do wonderful things with their educational career, so nothing can ever go wrong. And there seems to be a lot of effort being put into this, into kind of, how should we say, sustaining this kind of a myth in many communities. And the whole thing, it's a shame, because if you start looking into the origin of the expression model minority, you find something very different. This is one of those expressions that comes to us from the United States and was coined in the 1950s by a sociologist by name Peterson. So what Peterson did was he contrasted the behavior of the African community in the southern part of the United States. And as you know, this was a time of great social turmoil, because you had Martin Luther King, and that was the whole civil rights era. So this behavior was contrasted with the behavior of the Asian community in California, where you did not have this kind of organizing. So from Peterson's point of view, you had one community that did not have jobs, did not contribute to the tax pool, was always organizing and wanted more. And another community out west, which always had jobs, wanted professional success, and did not really mind if they were overlooked for promotion, or they just didn't want rates. So they were called the model minority. So model minority is one that works hard and expects nothing in exchange, which is a different way of saying that is to say that the model minority should have the personality of a doormat. A doormat which is very useful, serves a wonderful purpose, but when you finally get ready to throw it out, it is not going to protest. How many times have you seen a doormat protest when you want to discard it? Right? It just goes away. So that's the kind of personality you're looking at when you call something a model minority. And it's therefore a shame that there are so many newcomer communities that fight so hard to look at, that's not it, that to live up to this whole business of being a model minority. So the impact of hidden homelessness. The first thing is the children will not have enough space to study. And when you have so many children together, they're going to find lots of things to do besides studying. Right? So this defeats the whole purpose of why the parents came here in the first place. If you ask the newcomers, as I said in my very first slide, why did you leave a successful life behind and come to Canada? The answer almost always is we wanted to give our children a better future. Excepting this is not a better future. It's not even the same future. You're just going downhill. So then what happens, you have health-related issues. Depression is a surprisingly common thing among many newcomers who live in situations of hidden homelessness. But yes, depression under the best of circumstances is a dirty word. And more so in the newcomer communities, which is all about, the model minority and what have you. So this kind of an issue is never talked about, let alone dealt with. Right? So then we have to think about the implications of hidden homelessness. And I think the point is already made that the census does not account for various kinds of, situations of various kinds of homeless. So now the question then becomes, how does this census account for the hidden homeless? And I really do not have an answer. So when we are told that the population of Toronto is 6.5 million, is it really 6.5 million? Is it 6.8 million or 7.2 million? Is a matter of conjecture, right? So I'm not sure what really goes on there. Then this brings us to the next policy question, which is it possible that the lack of accuracy in counting the hidden homeless actually has an impact on monetary transfers? Because monetary transfers from one level of government to another level of government is almost always impacted by the numbers of people involved, which is why smaller cities get smaller amounts of money than large cities like Toronto. Right? So if you had the figures themselves are wrong, then chances are that you're underfunding Toronto, which has been a complaint for a very long time for other reasons, not because of this. And then what happens is, so does that mean we are marginalizing a marginalized community even more? Because we do not know what the issues are, and then we do not have the resources to respond to those issues. So it essentially marginalizes an already marginalized community. And then of course the last part is, I know that Emily is going to actually have good news for you about the last point, because I know that in your study you found that people who live in high-rise buildings in situations of poverty still find it a vibrant place to raise their children. But then the question then becomes, realistically, how long can this kind of social fabric last? So is it possible that in the not too distant future, we will see the issues of the average American downtown manifested in these high-rise buildings? I hope not. So in terms of solutions, obviously there is the need for public education, specifically targeting newcomers before and after their arrival about the rights as tenants. And this is one of the biggest gaps that we have in the existing settlement system, which is there is no mechanism in place to inculcate a sense of confidence in the fairness of the Canadian justice system among newcomers. Then there is the need for partnerships between housing agencies, the housing help agencies and agencies that serve newcomers. It seems kind of very obvious, but when you get to the nitty-gritty, you soon realize that it is actually a fairly complex process. Then the other thing is that we should encourage second suites. In fact, just today morning, when I was in the York region working on another project in the York region, and I was told that that the York region is finally looking into the concept of second suites. I practically wanted to, how shall we say, give the person a big hug. Because as of today, there are only 3 out of 23 municipalities in the York region have second suites. Second suite is defined that it's like an official basement to rent. And then because I know even in Scarborough, for example, the issue of second suites is controversial. There is a point of view among politicians that a second suite essentially becomes a blow-off, and therefore there is not a whole lot of support for second suites. Right, so, and last but not the very least, I think it is important to have a rent supplement program that is specifically aimed at newcomers. This can be analogous to the rent bank program that is run by the province, which essentially what happens in the rent bank program, and we can take this up during the Q&A, is the province puts around $6 million into the market every year, and this is then dispersed among the municipalities to be given out as loans to community members who have a temporary financial issue that prevents them from paying the rent. So it's an interest-free loan, and the expectation is that it will be paid back. So if you had this kind of and with 6 million, and so what happens is your capital essentially keeps increasing, because every year there's $6 million coming in, and then there's repayment money from the previous years. So the chest essentially grows. So if you did the same thing with the newcomer community and put, say, around $10 million into the pool every year, which is doable from a finances point of view, one wonders what miracles we could have 5 years down the road.